I am very honored and pleased to be making my maiden presentation as leader of the People's National Party. Mr. Speaker, we all gain membership of this House through the support and very often the sacrifices of others. So let me begin, first of all, by expressing my own gratitude to my constituents in East Central St. Andrew. Cousin you. They are very wise people. They have kept me coming to this House, Mr. Speaker, for the past 6 consecutive terms. They are represented here today by my councillors, Nena Wilson from the Hagley Park Division and Dennis Gordon of the Maxfield Division, along with members of the executive and of the constituency and other members of the constituency. Let me also thank my colleagues and comrades in the People's National Party, both those in Parliament and those outside, whose advice, prayers, and solidarity has been a constant source of inspiration. Mr. Speaker, there are many, many others, too numerous to mention. Members of my security team, members of the staff at 89 Old Hope Road and at the office of the Leader of the Opposition, members of my personal staff, friends, people who keep you motivated by their continued prayers, advice, and guidance. The broad mass of the Jamaican people, I owe them also my deep appreciation and my gratitude. I want to especially also recognize my family, my wife Sandra, who is here, with one of our sons, Luke, the other members of our family, one of which has taken a decision to be a member of this chamber against my best advice. One who, well, he keeps coming back. Keeps coming back. And in fact, I really want to say that without the support of my family and their encouragement and the diligence of my wife, which makes it possible for me to sacrifice myself here and still eat, I want to express my thanks. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, order, please. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding our differences from time to time, let me recognize your efforts to guide our deliberations in this House as we all try to conduct the people's business. I want also to express appreciation to the clerk and other members of the parliamentary staff, the orderlies, the marshal, the various members of staff downstairs and upstairs who make our stay in the Parliament productive. Finally, and most important, I give thanks to Almighty God who makes all things possible and makes it possible for us to be here. Mr. Speaker, what is the context in which this budget debate is taking place? What is the experience of the average Jamaican after 2 years of the Jamaica Labour Party administration? Are they better off today than they were 2 years ago? Do they think the economy is headed in the right direction? Are they hopeful about the future? How are the workers faring? Many face the risk of losing hard-won rights, as a number of employers now regard permanent workers as contract workers. With this new arrangement, many of these workers have lost their pension rights, their maternity leave rights, the opportunity for collective bargaining, and other hard-won rights. They also have to contend with the government's indifference and lack of respect for the principles of the trade union movement. This is shown most recently, Mr. Speaker, in the government's response to the teachers, the police, the nurses, and other public sector workers in the current wage negotiations. Take the case of Miss Miri, a day's worker from Morant Bay. Over the past 2 years, her little pay can no longer stretch to buy the basic necessities for her family, especially at the new prices. The price of flour is now $65 per pound. 2 years ago, when the basket came, 2 years ago when the basket came, it was $45. 2 years ago when the basket came, it was $45. This is a 44% increase. A tin of sardine is now $160, up from $108 2 years ago when the basket came. I'm not bringing a basket, Mr. Speaker, because I couldn't carry anything much. A tin of Betty milk costs $268 today. It was $195 2 years ago. Chicken neck, the only meat she can afford, has almost doubled in price in 2 years, from $50 per pound to $90 per pound, an 80% increase. She can no longer afford saltfish, which has gone from $350 to $550. And eggs are increasingly out of our reach at $360 per dozen, up from $250 2 years ago. Feeding our family at these new increased prices is only one of our burdens. She's also making every sacrifice to send her 3 children to school to better themselves, as she knows that education is the only gateway to a secure future for them. Like so many Jamaican mothers, she gets up every school day at 3:30 in the morning with her son, who has passed GSAT for Arden, so he can take the bus from Morant Bay into Kingston at Arden, because the schools closest to them give an uncertain educational product. It happens all over. You have children coming from Port Antonio to Kingston, people coming from Annata Bay, all over. It's a thing we need to change. It's not a thing we need to mock. Many a day, after she finds the money to pay the increased route taxi and bus fares, there is little left for anything else. Those who depend on our health services are not faring much better. The situation is now unbearable in Western Jamaica, given the state of the Cornwall Regional Hospital. When the Shadow Minister of Health, Dayton Campbell, and his colleagues visited Cornwall Regional, they found the state of disrepair so extensive as to make meaningful healthcare delivery virtually impossible. A teacher who broke her hip and needed surgery urgently went to Cornwall Regional Hospital only to find that she could not be admitted because they were only doing emergencies. On her salary, a private doctor is out of the question. A retired policeman who had given years of service in the force suffered a stroke and needs regular physiotherapy, but the service has been scaled down and he's left to suffer at home as a pensioner. A nurse who works at the Cornwall Regional Hospital and is now pregnant with her first child had been exposed to noxious fumes and worries about the impact on her unborn child. To make matters worse, she learns that the government is moving obstetrics department to Falmouth, leaving her to worry as to where her baby will be delivered. This is not a situation that is confined to Western Jamaica. All of us on both sides of this House know from our constituents of the deterioration of the health services island-wide. Oftentimes, and I am certain on both sides of the House, I have had to appeal on occasion to the Minister of Health. Just last week, member of the constituency in need of dialysis was getting it from a private provider, $20,000 each time, twice a week. Money run out. I made contact with some people at KPH. They say, can't help, the list is thousands of persons long. Somebody has to die before that person could get on. And there are many before him. Oftentimes, you get the prescription from the doctor, free, of course, but the medicine is not available at the hospital. And they find them way to the MP, to another friend, to somebody who can help, or they just languish and continue to get ill without any help at all. On top of it all, Jamaicans from all walks of life experience the stress and fear that grows with the daily reports of murders island-wide. Murders last year were higher than the year before, and this year so far they are 6% higher than they were at this time last year. In this kind of situation, one wonders how a government can publish a supplement claiming achievements and inviting people to celebrate without one word of commiseration for this sort of distress that so many Jamaicans have. No wonder people are rapidly losing hope, and losing hope, I dare say, in the political system as a whole. We cannot continue this way. Could Jamaica have been better today? Mr. Speaker, our spokesman on finance gave a masterly presentation. Earlier this week, and set out the facts. Some bear repetition. 2 years ago, when we left office, we left a sound macroeconomic foundation. Debt was down. Inflation was 3% for the fiscal year 2015 to 2016, the lowest in 40 years. Employment was trending upwards and unemployment downwards. There were increased foreign exchange reserves. Our international credit ratings were upgraded successively. World Bank rankings of doing business had improved. We had also returned the economy to growth and left a platform for further growth with a number of projects already started or scheduled to start. So when you talk about tourism growth, remember more people are coming into the hotels that were built under the previous administration. 10 new hotels negotiated. Contact and negotiations had already started with GISCO by the member from East Kingston and Port Royal. Cabinet had already given approvals for land acquisition for the South Coast Highway, which has been scaled down by this current administration. Other things in their list including the Nagahead Technical Park, the North-South Highway development projects, the privatization. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I noticed in the section of the Minister of Finance's speech, and he talked about the growth-promoting platforms that, and you can find it on page 12, 4 of the 6 projects were all projects underway during the term of the previous administration. What the minister can justifiably claim, and I want to recognize it, is that he has remained committed to the central objective of the economic reform program, which is to reduce the nation's debt. And I applaud the government for that achievement. Let me also acknowledge that the trend of increasing employment that began in 2013 under the economic reform program has continued, and respect is due. Where the government has not been so successful is in exploiting the full potential for growth, which during the last administration was projected at 2.9% on average for the period 2017 to 2020. This government has been forced to scale down those growth projections, and now they stand at 1.8%. So actual growth is down. In fact, it is less than it was when we left office for this year, 0.5% for 2017, 0.9% for the fiscal year projected. So not only is growth down below where we left it, but the projections are also down because the performance of the government has been more chat than action. It struck me that we heard that there was going to be 5 in 4. This projection, it will happen one day. The projection has already been revised downward. But what was striking, the minister spoke for 2 hours and not a mention of 5 in 4. The Minister of Finance. It is clear it is clear, Mr. Speaker, that the deterioration in critical services and the hardships being experienced by the Jamaican people are not accidental. They have their roots in the approach to decision-making made by this government. An approach to decision-making which, quite frankly, put partisan political considerations ahead of the best interests of the country. Simply put, they have not put Jamaica first. The most glaring example of this type of decision-making and the preoccupation with the search for political advantage was the election promise to deliver $18,000 in the pockets of voters by way of the increase in the income tax threshold without any additional taxes. We warned them that it couldn't be done, that it would take a massive tax package of $31 billion to deliver on that promise, and that it would set back potential growth and it would make life harder for the masses of the people. They didn't do the math. The IMF did the math and confirmed the numbers. The government went ahead and secured their political fig leaf cover. And imposed a $31 billion tax package. That is the price. In the end, less than a half of the PAYE taxpayers benefited at all, and less than 100,000 benefited from the full 18,000. On the other hand, the entire population had to pay the $31 billion of taxes. And the blow was hardest on the poor, the pensioners who still to date have got no increase, the minimum wage earners that were promised that it would be doubled have got not a thing, not 1 red cent more, and the working class, the working poor who spend 80% of their budget on foodstuffs have had to face the impossible price rises that were described by the next Minister of Finance, the Member of Parliament for South Centre. As was pointed out also, Mr. Speaker, the hardship wasn't just in the pocket of the poor and the working poor. Because one consequence of this huge tax package, which was the limit of what the people could bear, was that they underfinanced the social services that were needed in health, education, and security. And so, if you don't provide enough resources in all these areas, the quality of the service is going to get worse. So, it's not an accident that crime got worse, because the police didn't have either enough vehicles, nor did they have enough gas, nor did they have enough manpower. That garbage collection couldn't get the number of trucks needed on time. The health services couldn't get all that was needed to buy medicine, replace x-ray machines, and all of that to make free health care a meaningful reality. And so the poor took a double blow. They took a blow by having to go into their pockets to find the money for food and increase GCT and all the other things. And they took a blow because they are the ones that rely most of all on the public services provided by government. But to make matters worse, Mr. Speaker, to make matters worse, while the government was imposing this massive tax burden on the people of Jamaica in order to fulfill a misconceived political promise, they were giving tax breaks to those who didn't need it by abandoning the bauxite levy, which had delivered and which still has the potential to deliver fundamental benefits to the people of Jamaica for this depleting mineral resource. And speaking personally, Mr. Speaker, I believe the effort made by Michael Manley and his team to secure benefits for Jamaica through the bauxite levy scheme represents one of the high points of Jamaica's standing of points in the world. Yet now, according to what is said by the companies, and I quote, the government has stated its commitment to the removal of the bauxite levy scheme in the medium term. Wow. We fully accept that in times of crisis, such as Jamaica faced in 2008 and 2009, there can be a basis for an emergency suspension of the bauxite levy or a renegotiation of some of the rates. However, no one can claim that such a crisis exists in the international aluminium markets now. Prices are on a global high, with one of the companies that operates in Jamaica reporting that their profits, not their Jamaican profits, their profits are up 900%. And yet the government is planning to give them another 5 years without the levy. What kind of government is that? You know, sometimes, Mr. Speaker, it looks like macaroni running the government. How can a government which gave up over $4 billion in revenues in the past 2 years to the bauxite companies, $4 billion, now claim that they would need to impose new taxes in order to pay increases for teachers? What kind of madness is that? Tax the poor, refuse to pay the teachers struggling, and say and give up $4 billion to bauxite multinationals earning 900% profits. Bad decisions, Mr. Speaker, have bad consequences for the people of Jamaica. In addition to costly, bad decision making, this administration has failed to take a stand against corruption. And corruption also represents a waste of resources. Resources that could otherwise be spent to pay the teachers some more, pay the nurses some more, pay the police some more, pay the medical community some more. We had 600 million in the bushing program. Some say 8, I'm not quarreling over the 200 million. But we know at least 6.
Yes, at least.
It was followed by the $243 million for the used car for police. That scandal isn't over yet because the money has been paid and the cars still haven't been delivered. In neither case has the Prime Minister taken action, much less taken the appropriate action.
No action.
Corruption, Mr. Speaker, saps the energies of the public. It weakens public confidence in political authority and in our national institutions. And most of all, it wastes resources that could otherwise be spent to improve the conditions of life. To fail to take strong action and to stand up against corrupt behavior is to normalize corrupt practices as part of our national reality. It will only open the door for the further proliferation of crime, as everybody thinks that anything can be done just to eat a food, no matter how much it is in breach of the law. I think it's important to understand also that when corruption becomes normalized, it is hardest on the poor. Corruption represents just one more barrier that those who want to step up in life have to overcome as they try to move up. If you want to drive your vehicle, you have to let off our money here. If you want to pass your car, you have to let off our money there. If you want to move some things through customs across the ports so that you can start a little business, you have to let off our money there. It is toughest on the poorest. And that's why we have to take a stand in this parliament and on both sides against corruption in this country. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, there are some specific issues that will make a difference. First is the implementation of the proposal by the National Integrity Action that no contract should be deemed too small to fall within the ambit and the focus of what was the Office of the Contractor General, now the Single Anti-Corruption Agency. Corruption is not a matter of big dollars versus small dollars. If you will thief $10, you will thief $1 million. What we need to do is to find the thief and take him out of the system and show that the society is against it. So we support the view that no contract, no matter the size, should be excluded from the right of review by the anti-corruption authorities. You support the view then? Okay. Well, no, he supports it. No, not on everything. Some are excluded because of size. The other thing that we believe and we support is the proposal made by the National Integrity Action that breaches of the political code of conduct should be criminalized. Let's put laws in place to stop this waste of public resources on election hearings. we're going to be either serious about it or we're not. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say something on perhaps what is the most pressing issue in Jamaica today, the issue of crime in general, and in particular, the alarming murder rate. In 1962, the year of independence, the homicide rate was 4 per 100,000. Now, 56 years after, as we are in the 56th year, this has increased 15 times to 60 per 100,000. This is twice that of the international benchmark for countries that are having civil wars. In the rural parish of St. James and our tourism capital, the murder rate last year went up to in excess of 100 per 100,000. How did we get there? There is no doubt that the murder rate was given a decisive push with the political tribalism which surfaced in the first 2 decades after independence. However, 40 years of low growth plus our collective failure to build a more inclusive Jamaica has been at the root, in our view, of the explosion of violent crime in independent Jamaica. Together with the weaknesses in the education and training system, this has created a grouping of about 325,000 persons between the ages of 15 and 34, a young group of people who are neither working nor looking for work. It is from this cohort that the most vulnerable boys in particular quickly degenerate into ready recruits for a life of crime within profit-seeking criminal organizations. The present range of criminal activity within these organized crime groupings, which started out focusing primarily on drug transshipment, but subsequently it has become involved, and today it includes not only transshipment of drugs, but it includes extortion, lotto scamming, smuggling through the ports, and human trafficking. It is the competition between these organized criminal groups. Some say gangs. I think the term gangs mixes up a lot of different things. We are talking about profit-seeking criminal enterprises. It is the competition between these enterprises that drives the murder rates. But there's another dimension, Mr. Speaker. Recent research from our own university, from our anthropologists, show that some 53% of the murders are committed by repeat killers, our own homegrown psychopaths and sociopaths. It is frightening. Some 90%, according to the reports from the university, some 90% of these repeat killers are nurtured in broken homes. Fathers were absent, but perhaps the most important aspect of the findings is that these boys were all abused by their mothers. In turn, these mothers themselves had been the victims of abuse in their early years, having either been raped, tortured or otherwise abused themselves. What this evidence suggests is that whereas boys more readily excuse the absence of or abuse of fathers, the feeling of ultimate betrayal comes with the abuse by their mothers, whom they saw as their one source of unconditional love and affection, and which turned against them. This sense of betrayal is at the heart of their degeneration of individuals and their decline into psychopathology and sociopathology. In short, Mr. Speaker, for the medium term, we have to close down this breeding ground for the creation of these killers. The interventions that are required go far beyond the ZOZOs and the provision of temporary employment and facilities. I'm not saying that those don't help, but what we need is the immediate recruitment of an army of trained social workers to target these potential dropouts from early on, to identify the early stages of this decline into pathological behavior, and to oversee the re-socialization and nurturing of this core of youngsters. While the interventions for reducing the breeding ground for crime are being implemented, the training and equipping of the Jamaica Constabulary Force to manage crime more effectively must proceed apace. This training, however, needs to be radically different from that which exists now, and which recognizes that effective policing today, in today's world, is intelligence-led policing. It is not brawn, it is brain that is needed to guide modern policing. Most of all, Mr. Speaker, as a country, we must recognize that to effectively overcome the current crisis by which we are gripped, it will require a unified national effort. The time for petty partisan politicking around the issue of crime is past. If it ever existed, it cannot exist now. So we won't hear no more talk about who going to make you sleep with door open, and a vote for this side is a vote for crime and a vote. We can't go that way. It is irresponsible in the face of the kind of crisis that we face. We on this side have always offered our cooperation in a national effort to fight crime. And there are some essential elements that must form part of any national effort, which will require cooperation and collaboration between both sides in this House. I want to mention just a few. First of all, it has been proposed since the 2014 review. What was the review? Member from Central Manchester, 2014. And indeed going as far back as the 2007-2008 strategic review. It was proposed that the Police Service Commission and the Police Civilian Oversight Authority needed to be fused so that you can have the kind of effective oversight of the operations of the police force, and that this oversight should take place within an entity that has disciplinary powers. That's what was proposed. The details still have to be refined and settled, but it requires constitutional reform. And if that is to take place, given the nature of the provisions, both sides in this House will have to agree to it. And so we want that to be on the agenda. It is also true that the strengthening of the judiciary and the court systems is an important part of any effort to confront the runaway murder rate and runaway crime. And again, as far back as 1993, when you tended to be more reasonable in the Constitutional Commission. No. When you tended to be, but you took up bad company. Maybe. I won't tell you who his company was. But it was mooted in the original constitutional reform procedures that the role of the Judicial Services Commission needed to be reviewed so that it could perform greater oversight for standards of performance by the judges. And I dare say, Mr. Speaker, we need to bring the Department of Public Prosecutions within the ambit of such a review and accountability process. So we don't disagree when the Prime Minister made his, what I would call a wrong move the other day with the probationary appointment of the Chief Justice. We agree with the objective of greater judicial accountability, but that is not the way to approach it. That coming like macaroni was driving that bus. But we can in fact agree that we should look at a road to greater accountability. There is one more area. There is one more area. There is one more area. I believe, well, I can speak for this side and some work by previous administrations from that side. The fact is that the legislative framework governing intelligence gathering operations has been piecemeal. We have had Interception of Communications Act and amendments to it. We have had the Financial Investigations Division Act, which carries us some way. The military intelligence operations are governed by the Defense Act, and the JCF has its own organization, but there is no overarching legislation that provides a framework for civilian intelligence gathering, the sharing of the information, and importantly, the protection of the rights of the citizens and the protection of the agents of the state. For example, and I can speak about it a bit because we wrestled with it. It is standard in some jurisdictions that if you believe a criminal organization is operating from a particular premises, listening devices and other surveillance devices can be placed there. In our case, any agent of the state proceeding to do so would have to do so illegally, without protection. And that's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is that there is a vast technological revolution underway, allowing for more and more data, surveillance by drones, audio surveillance, video surveillance, computer penetration of people's privacy. The Data Act can provide some protection. But quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, we need, in the face of this, to protect the rights of citizens against undue intrusion in their privacy under the guise of investigations using intelligence services.
Mr. Minister, the time for speaking of the member has expired.
Mr.
You may wish
Speaker,
to-
I ask that the Speaker's time be extended sufficiently for him to complete his presentation.
Those in favour? Aye. Those against? As have it. Mr. Phillips.
So, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Much obliged to members of the over the years, two things have prevented, in my experience. One, the people wanting to pass the legislation have always been concerned about how it would appear. And the other, the fear of political manipulation of this intelligence capability by one side or the other. People know what? No private arrangement. The fact of the matter is, other countries have dealt with it. Appropriate oversight mechanisms can be found. And I think that because we are on such an edge of technological advance, we need, and because we are facing such an onslaught from sophisticated criminals in the country, we need to move into the modern world of policing and establish appropriate mechanisms. Now, these are some of the issues, Mr. Prime Minister, through you, Mr. Speaker, that we are prepared to discuss at the Vale Royal talks. But quite frankly, Prime Minister, for this part of the discussions, I believe we may want to bring in other stakeholders as well. The churches, the trade unions, the criminologists, the private sector. The idea of the summit was mooted by the private sector. Maybe for this part of our talks, we should have it as a unified national effort, because if we bring all the parties in at the beginning, we have the basis for a united national effort. Regarding the other issues surrounding the national security and the issues arising from the strategic review of the JCF, our Shadow Minister of National Security will cover those issues when he speaks. There's no doubt, however, that there's an urgent need to control crime in order to restore hope in Jamaica's future. Mr. Speaker, we on this side are convinced that the transformation of the economy and the restoration of hope will not flow automatically from macroeconomic stabilization. Our own experience, together with the lessons learned from other countries which have achieved the status of developed countries, shows us that tinkering, piecemeal measures, and a commitment to the trickle-down theory of economics and social development won't get us very far. To build the kind of Jamaica that we seek, Mr. Speaker, we have to dismantle and transform the social arrangements which continue to form barriers to the advancement and upward social mobility of the poor. This is what we'll have to do if we want to create a society which offers greater social and economic equity in our country. What we need is a radical approach to social transformation and not piecemeal tinkering. To this end, one of my first actions as leader of the opposition was to establish 3 commissions to develop a policy framework to guide the process of social and economic transformation. The first was the Land Ownership Commission, chaired by eminent attorney Norman Minot, with a mandate to recommend radical and effective strategies, systems, and mechanisms to significantly improve and facilitate a legal path to land ownership for the majority of Jamaicans. The second was the Youth Employment, Innovation and New Economy Commission, chaired by highly successful investment banker Gary Peart, to design an appropriate economic framework and a new economy action plan to modernize and transform globally competitive areas of the Jamaican economy. The third commission, Education Reimagined, chaired by eminent educator Mrs. Elaine Foster Allen, to review policy and recommend strategies to address gaps and enhance and release the capacity of every Jamaican to contribute, innovate, create, and lead in the building of a Jamaica that works for all and not just for a few. All 3 commissions have submitted some preliminary reports, and I want to share some of their recommendations. Not all, but let it be understood, Mr. Speaker, our primary mission. In fact, I can say the very reason why the People's National Party was formed, the very reason why it exists, is to empower the people of Jamaica and create an equitable society. Education has always been viewed by us on this side as the main mechanism for creating a more equitable society. The decisive assault on the old educational arrangements, which left the majority of Jamaicans behind, was undertaken by Norman Washington Manley in 1958 when the Common Entrance Examination was introduced. By the stroke of that pen, the doors of the traditional high schools were opened up to Jamaican children from families without means. I was one of those children who got that opportunity. I dare say everyone here. Yes. All, if certainly most. And I think that applies equally on that side. Subsequent measures by administrations drawn from both sides of the House have continued to extend educational opportunities to children from poorer families. And we should pay respect to Edwin Allen, minister from that side, who introduced the 70-30 provision that reserved the majority of places in the common entrance for children from primary schools. Yet, Mr. Speaker, despite all these efforts, including the initial efforts in the 1970s to open up university education to all, despite having today more than 40,000 children getting a place in a high school, the fact is, the two-tiered educational system, what one journalist described, not inaccurately, as the apartheid system of education in Jamaica, still remains intact. The data for 2017 show that there is one level of performance for high schools, traditional high schools, and another level of performance for the so-called non-traditional high schools. If we consider the acceptable standard of performance at the high school level to be getting 5 or more passes at a single sitting, including maths and or English, then the evidence shows that the traditional high schools are doing much better. At the traditional high schools, 77% on average of each cohort, 77% achieve this level of performance. That is, getting 5 or more at a single sitting with math or English. There are, at the non-traditional high schools, which is the larger number, in fact, there are 45 schools classified as traditional and 118 as non-traditional. At the non-traditional high schools, now remember, at the traditional high schools, 77% of the cohort. At the non-traditional high schools, 14% of the cohort getting 5 or more. 14. 69% of the non-traditional, 69 schools, or 81%, sorry, of the non-traditional had 20% or less of the cohort passing 5 subjects, including math or English. No wonder, Mr. Speaker, every year parents and families got through a trauma when GSAT results come out and when the children have to sit there. You could change the name of the exam 1,000 times. It's not going to change the reality. The reality is that at 11 years old or 12 years old, if you don't get into a good school, you suck salt for the rest of your life. We can't make it go on this year. It's not your problem or our problem, not your fault or our fault. We just cannot continue this way. Yeah? We are literally leaving the vast majority of our children behind. There have been many stops and starts. 2004, there was an agreement in this house. Edward Seaga sat here at that time, P.J. Patterson there. We agreed that we would have to find extraordinary ways to fund this thing. There are some issues, but the reality remains today in 2017. The fact of the matter is The fact of the matter is it is out of this vast majority of children that we are leaving behind each year. It is out of this 86% of students in the non-traditional schools who either have to seek remedial education from Hart or some other institution, or many of them become so-called unattached, and it is from this group that the recruits into the criminal organizations come. Indeed, the news is the criminal organizations not waiting till they leave school to recruit them. They're recruiting them right there in the schools now. You know that. This is an area of our national life that requires unified national effort. It should not divide us politically. It should not divide uptown from downtown. It shouldn't divide town from country. It should not divide you whether you're a churchgoer or whether you don't go to church. We will never create a modern, vibrant, progressive Jamaica as long as we leave 2/3 of our children behind in the search for education and knowledge. In this 21st century, which they call the age of information, and we have children coming out of school can't read and write.
Shame.
The problem does not begin at the high school level. It goes back to early childhood education. We support the effort started in our time to upgrade basic schools into infant departments. The truth is that 68% of all early childhood teachers in the basic schools are untrained, and oftentimes without the proper behavioral disposition to deal with the special needs of children. 30% of those children in the basic schools are determined to have behavioral problems, unprepared for educational instruction. Our Shadow Minister of Education will deal more fully with our proposals to bring our educational system as quickly as possible to the required standards. Simply put, many families find it impossible to meet the expenses of their children's education. Indeed, the basic data from the Survey of Living Conditions points to the fact that meeting the needs of the child at school is taking up to 14% of the household consumption of the poorest 10% of the population. So 3 children at school running at 42% of the household income, which is not leaving anything for much else. It's not surprising then that the practice that used to exist decades ago, one might say hundreds of years ago, of stopping the children from school continues. They used to stop them so they could go to market. Yes. But we must go further. We must go further. A future PNP administration, in order to prevent the scourge of absenteeism, will make one simple commitment. Because hungry children can't learn. We are committed to give every single Jamaican child in a school 1 meal a day so they can learn better. 5 days a week. We did it with Pat, but I'm talking about an ironclad guardian, and I don't mind you doing it. I hope you do it. But it's not happening now. It's not happening now.
education isn't free now.
We don't have to struggle to be first in this.
Go ahead and do it first.
We don't have to struggle to be first in this. Quite frankly, in doing it, there are many options. I had an experience of a school. In their protection, I won't name them. It's a school in my constituency. Children were not coming. Many of those who came were falling asleep in class, not learning. The principal approached me, and I approached a private business entity, and they agreed to provide the supplies, rice and porridge and milk and things. And by the simple fact of providing the meal, attendance went up to the 90% and more. The children came to school, and this school, which was getting in your grade 4 achievements test consistently low results, started picking up from just the simple intervention of providing one meal. We need to do more at the basic school level though. We want an immediate program over 3 years. Let's train the 5,000 teachers and put trained teachers in our basic school. Don't give away the taxes to the bauxite companies. Let's use it and raise the level for our children. Let us also provide a cadre of social workers to work alongside the parents in the communities. Teach them how to provide early stimulation to the children in the preschool age. You quoted it. The benefits are real. We have to ensure that we will be the last generation that sees this two-tiered educational apartheid in Jamaica. Specifically with the high schools, we are committed to embarking on a program of leadership training and intervention through an institute of excellence geared at the non-traditional high schools to bring each one of them up to the level. The truth is, it is a task that is not going to be solved simply by throwing money at the problem, although money is needed. It is a task that will have to be resolved almost by an intervention, classroom by classroom, principal by principal, subject leader by subject leader. Because what is happening right now is that many of the basic pedagogic techniques, the instructional techniques that the teachers learn at university are abandoned when they get into the schools. And we have created a level of low expectation for poor people's children. That it is all right for them to fail. It is all right for them not to do enough. And sometimes the very members of staff in the schools create this sense of non-achievement. I'm glad you're excited. I'm glad you're excited. Because that means we can find common cause and send Macaroni to sit down. Okay. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, leadership in the schools makes the critical difference. And leadership in each classroom makes the critical difference. And to do it, we have to establish partnerships in the schools with our teachers and with the community. Let me tell you, accomplishing this task will take a national crusade. It will need us to link with the churches, the parents, the private sector, the community, the alumni associations. You know, some research was done at our university. It asks the question, why do the traditional high schools sustain their standards over the decades, in some instances hundreds of years? And why have the non-traditional not stepped up? The answer provided by the research was reasonably simple. Self-evident, one might say. Simply because there was a body of persons who cared what happened in the schools. The church schools, if it was. That's why we don't have to fight the churches. We should give them more authority in the schools. The alumni associations. I went to a school that was founded. You're not giving him a chance to talk at Belmont Road.
No, it's multimodal.
What I like is that the excitement is spreading. Mr. Speaker, what we need to do, we have the churches, we have the alumni associations. As I was saying, I went to a school where when the performance started going down, the former students, some from 50 years ago, got involved with the students who just graduated last year. Everybody came together and said, let's rescue this place now. That happens. We must encourage it. What we need to do is to create a community of interest. Let's create some community trusts so that the communities can take responsibility for the schools. That when they're going off the rails, they come back. Because that's how we're going to accomplish this. We have to put an end to the system of educational apartheid, which creates a two-tiered system of education in Jamaica, once and for all. It won't take tinkering. It's going to require massive, massive collaboration and intervention. The other issue, Mr. Speaker, is the issue of land ownership. The present distribution of land ownership, together with the arrangements for access to land for both agriculture and housing, reflects a pattern of inequality that has existed in Jamaica since emancipation. Over 700,000 Jamaicans, or 1/4 of our population, live in so-called squatter communities, informal settlements. In addition, approximately 60% of the farmers farming small parcels of land have no title for these lands. As a result, most are unable to secure the capital that would be needed to modernize their production arrangements from the financial institutions, and therefore remained in the grip of poverty and low productivity. Similarly, for those Jamaicans who, for generation after generation, have no title, no access, no job, no money, no way of getting their title. I can tell you that there's probably no single act of social and economic engineering that could uplift the masses of the people more than giving them their title to their piece of this land, their place in the sun. And there is no area of our national life that requires more radical treatment than this issue of land and land titling. Many efforts have been made over the years to modernize the basic framework. The original Registration of Titles Act was passed 129 years ago. There have been amendments to it, and other efforts have taken place. You had the Local Improvement Development Act in the 70s, Local Amenities Act in the 70s. There was also the LAMP program coming out of the 90s. But despite that, we still have the situation here in 2018 where 1/4 of the country lives in an informal settlement, not only without title, but without the basic amenities of life: water, electricity, sewage, roads. I know, beginning with Buster, everybody started over here. You can come. You remember? All right. Mr. Speaker, the LAMP program, well designed, but the fact is, what we have found is that more than 75% of the applications for title that were made under the LAMP program were rejected because they were tied to requests for subdivision. Based upon the recommendations of the Land Ownership Commission that I established earlier last year, a future PNP administration will pass an overarching legislative provision, bringing all the various acts involved in land titling, land registration, subdivisions into a single legislative instrument that can be easily understood and administered. We will separate the issue of subdivision approval from the issue of titling, so this will allow people to get title without having to wait indefinitely for parish council approvals. And then they'll be able to go to the bank. We will use the modern cadastral technologies to undertake an island-wide mapping of lands necessary for an effective land administration system. because the cost of the surveys need to be lowered so that ordinary poor people can get access to the land. Generation after generation after generation, Mr. Speaker, has come, worked on this land, but can't get a piece of paper to say that this land is their land and they can find their place in the sun. As I said, without the basic amenities of life. Again, we need not tinkering, but radical solutions. We need to release lands in government's possession and transfer it to the people in these communities. Also, we are committed, a future People's National Party administration, to using at least 10 billion of the uncollected NHT refunds that have been there for over 7 years to finance an island-wide squatter community transformation. There are those who say we shouldn't tell them these things because they will do it. But if they do it, it will be to the benefit of the Jamaican people. And I am certain when the time comes, people will know who was the teacher and who was the student. This program would include the survey of existing housing sites, assistance with the provision of certificates of title and titles, assistance with building units to enable them to meet minimum standards, upgrading the infrastructure such as sewage facilities, water supplies, and the provision of regular legal supplies. This is what we mean by restoring hope through empowerment. None of our objectives of transforming education or community upgrading can be achieved unless Jamaica is able to build a modern, inclusive, globally competitive economy. The focus of our efforts, stabilization having been achieved and assuming it continues, will be on the small and medium-sized businesses. They are the key to providing the upward movement that will include all the people in our economic life. They provide the bulk of the employment, yet they have great difficulty in accessing capital at reasonable interest rates. Another obstacle to the growth of the sector is that our banks, for the most part, don't lend against intellectual property. Even today, after years of experience of such musical superstars like Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, and others, it is the case that if any one of them went in with their catalog of music to a bank, they would be unlikely to get any money to borrow against that collateral. Our small enterprises are also held back by the fact, as I mentioned, that over 60% of holders of small plots of land have no title. Government, while being the largest land owner, has not defined productive uses for the lands and keeps most of the land in their possession idle. That can't continue. In addition, there is the inability of entrepreneurs to access capital despite significant liquidity in the financial market, because many of the businesses don't have the adequate business plans and wherewithal. The next PNP administration will enable the flow of capital throughout the productive sector by establishing a credit insurance scheme, particularly for the small businesses. This will reduce the risk to the banks to lend to this sector, and that scheme will initially be funded by leveraging just some of the funds in the dormant accounts held by the commercial. Since we are talking about joining together, you should join and pass the legislation that has been brought by the member. This effort to provide a credit through a credit insurance scheme will be paralleled by a massive expansion of business advisory services to provide the training, the mentorship, the accounting services and others needed to make our small businesses truly world-class. Sectors such as our creative industries in music and entertainment, our animations. I mean, when you look at what our youths have done with macaroni, you realize that we have some of the most creative people imaginable here in Jamaica. We have to ensure that the people with the creativity get the opportunity. Included in this small business sector is the Airbnb sector, which was brought to attention by the then Minister of Tourism, the member for West Westmoreland. Today, Airbnb accommodations range from a couch to a room, to an apartment, to a townhouse, to a luxury villa, all across Jamaica, from $14 US a night in Port Antonio with Rasta Harry to $25 in Manly Meadows a night being charged. Tourism finally coming to the people, because when the world see the Jamaican people, they like them and they like the way we live. They like our type of life. They like the liberty of Jamaica. But we are excluding our people outside of our economic mainstream. No, that's the room where you go 1 hour. You. Finally, as we seek to modernize our economy and to facilitate economic growth and job creation, we have to recognize the specific place of the Jamaican worker in this endeavor. In May, we'll be celebrating the 80th anniversary of the 1938 Labor Rebellion and the founding of the modern labor movement. The rights of the workers won in this period include their rights to collective bargaining. Subsequent improvements include maternity pay for women, achieved by the great Michael Manley. Equal pay for women. The Labor Relations and Industrial Disputes Act, guaranteeing the rights of workers to organize. The rights of labor unions to secure better wages for workers, protect them against arbitrary dismissal, and to provide for appropriate dispute resolution procedures are all part of the important gains made by Jamaican workers. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, many of these rights are being threatened today. A key aspect of the erosion of the workers' situation is the increasing spread of the practice of designating full-time employees as contract workers. This is happening not only in the security guard sector, but also in tourism, in manufacturing as well, and in government employment. The consequence of all of this is that workers are being denied the basic benefits that have been won by struggle and effort over the previous 8 years. They're also being denied access to the protection provided by collective bargaining arrangements, which enable them, when all is said and done, to get better wages because they are part of a collective. The net effect of all of this is that these contract workers are trapped in a low-wage trap. And it leaves the majority of them in a situation where they simply can't manage from payday to payday. Many of these issues were supposed to have been addressed by the Labour Market Reform Commission, which we established during the previous administration. It was headed by Professor Marshall Hall. The late Lloyd Goodley was part of it, and others. Dwight Nelson subsequently took his place, and there was a wide membership. That commission has reported now for over 8 months, but the report can't see the light of day. Time come now, Mr. Prime Minister. Present the Labour Market Reform Commission report to Parliament. Ignoring tough issues don't make them go away. They just fester and come back worse. We recognize that the world of work has been affected by changes that have taken place in the world economy, and that new approaches to worker protection may have to be designed. But at the same time, let no one doubt that we intend to protect the workers. I want to assure the workers of Jamaica that the next PNP government will put a legal framework in place to protect contract workers. If you work, Mr. Speaker, you are a former trade union leader.
That's right.
What came to my attention just this past week, 2 workers in an enterprise called contract workers on temporary contracts, that is to say, renewing, working at the same place 24 years in one instance, 28 years in another instance. They deserve to be treated as workers with all the rights due to workers. Mr. What we did, you asked the question, what we did. What we did in the first
disturb the speaker. Go ahead, Mr. Phillips.
What we did was to get the Labour Market Reform Commission put in place to give a comprehensive perspective on this. The work is now finished. Make it come. Let us deal with the knotty questions that remain. We have to deal with that. And since we're dealing with the issue of workers, the approach taken by the government to the negotiations with the public sector workers is shameful, Mr. Speaker. because it does not respect the traditions of trade unionism and collective bargaining that have been established in this country. Mr. Speaker, I know you ought not to enter in the fray down here with us, but I believe your heart must be riled to see these basic principles of trade unionism breached. I am surprised that you. How can the workers reject a 4-year cycle, some of them, and then you unilaterally impose it on them? I hear you have changed. It breaches, well, that makes it even worse. I thought you had come to your senses, but obviously not. It cannot be the case that you impose a solution, a settlement on the workers by edict. That is not our Jamaican pattern. That is not the style of our democracy. That is reminiscent of dictatorship. It is not the way. It is not the way. Let me tell you, since you asked, we had a harder row to hoe. We had a wage freeze which had to be introduced and signed to before we could get the agreement. When he was bawling out, sign at any cost. They required us to have first 100% of the workers signing up, and we said we negotiated when everybody was bawling, sign, and all you was going on like this. What was happening? We insisted that it was going to be impossible, and they should not hold the country to ransom over 100%. We got it set at 60. We eventually, at the first thing, we got 80% of the workers. We eventually got 98% of the workers to sign on. The first principle that is needed, principle that is needed is respect for the workers. The second principle is a respect for the traditions of the Jamaican collective bargaining system. And the third thing that is required, Mr. Speaker, is some creativity of mind to find ways to reward workers, give them something, let them know that there are non-cash things that can be done, ways because you value their contribution to the country. I don't know who I should address this to, whether it's you or someone else. But For example, why don't you just go to the National Housing Trust? Go to the National Housing Trust. See if there is a way that you can address the mortgage needs of the teachers, the police, and the others. But if you did it in time, you wouldn't have to have this macaroni confusion. You knew the contract was going to end 2017, March 31st. We are now at the end of March 2018. The negotiations started too late, didn't get serious, no real discussion was taking place, and you come tell me now, 1 year after the contract period, that you're looking at NHT now. Yeah. Where was the creativity before? If you could talk to Horace Daly, he would tell you, he would give you free advice.
No, members, we're taking this a little too far now. Members, Mr. Daly, Mr. Vaz and Mr. Daly, please. I want to hear the speaker. I want to hear the member speaking. Will you speak to me rather than speaking to the Address the speaker, Mr. Phillips.
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. President, they're going to answer you and I cannot afford that.
I agree. I really want to speak to you, but I believe you know what I am saying already, that you must teach the workers with respect. I think they don't know. You don't know what they do now.
You haven't said it yet. As soon as you say it, they'll know it.
I am much obliged, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is essential, if we are to achieve our objectives, that we make our democratic institutions work. No doubt, one of the factors behind the country's failure to make adequate progress over the years has been our collective inability to find common cause in our parliament around fundamental national issues, whether involving educational policy or our security policy. Put another way, Mr. Speaker, our political culture has been just too tribalistic and divisive. But there is evidence in our history that as a country we can find ways to achieve common purposes. Trade unions used to be politically divided and in conflict with each other. You know those days, Mr. Speaker. But they were able to find common cause and establish a joint confederation. Yes. That's progress. Yes. Progress in the workers' cause. And glory to Hugh Shearer and Michael Manley, who led that progress and who were at the forefront of the divisions earlier too. Yes. We must learn from our lessons. In the 1970s, we were able to find common cause in the establishment of the Electoral Advisory Committee, having come to the edge of the precipice.
That's right.
and falling into the maelstrom of political violence and civil conflict. Sadly, Mr. Speaker, in this regard, I have to say, some old habits are beginning to emerge. And I pray to God we cut them off early.
Yeah. When you take leadership, though.
Over the years,
At least in Bond, you know.
Over the years, we have found agreement in deepening our parliamentary democracy by establishing standing sessional committees of the parliament under the chairmanship of the opposition. In this area too, as in the trade union negotiation practices, we are seeing step by step an approach which seems to want to dismantle the gains of the past. All these examples remind us that our democracy, whilst it rests on the practice of free and fair elections, is more than just elections.
That's correct.
It involves a set of traditions. It involves a culture of respect for the Constitution and for the laws, but perhaps most importantly, it involves respect for different views and the rights for different views to exist. You can't want to change the operations of committees in the parliament and the chairmanship of the committees just because the views coming out of it don't suit you.
No.
That's not democracy, that's not maturity. Modern parliaments do this everywhere. We were moving forward, now we are moving backward.
Regression.
Somebody push warming.
You man, don't want me to tell me do this anymore. You can do it tomorrow.
We can amend them tomorrow
If you require it.
because we trusted you. That was our mistake. We trusted you. We trusted you.
Bam, bam, bam. Bam, bam, You can't trust me.
Miss Lashley.
All right.
When you should not be sitting there then. Miss Lashley. You're not a cabinet minister. Then throw me out. Miss Lashley.
Last year, the government announced through the Minister of Finance that it was going to allocate $2.5 billion over 2 years to ensure that a clean list was provided. So, at that point, there was consensus in the House. When it came to the supplementary budget, nothing was there. It was deleted. During the debate, we raised the matter again in this parliament, and we were assured in this House by the Minister of Finance that the funds would be replaced in the budget of this year.
This coming year.
He said not to worry. He will provide it, and any provisional. No, you are taking serious business make joke. Don't do it.
Don't do it.
And he said that any initial expenditures to prepare the electoral office would be provided by the Ministry of Finance to do it, so that we should not take the matter any further, he said,
Yes.
in the supplementary debate.
That's what he said.
two fundamental principles arise.
But there's nothing in this budget.
And there's a third, now that the director of elections has resigned. But when I say a Chinaman must bill it. Jamaican. Native. Mr. Speaker. Native. The first principle is the need for a clean voters list in order to ensure that elections are free and fair. In the absence of confidence about the integrity of the list, we are opening the door to electoral manipulation, which will inevitably lead to conflict. We have been that way before. Once upon a time, you may be either too young to remember, or you may have been overseas, or maybe you never paid attention.
Not you, matter.
No, you may forget. We have gone through situations, where both governments used to control the making up of a list. What is happening now is that this government is using the power of its control of finances to prepare a proper list. And that is a dangerous development. The now recently resigned director of elections spoke publicly about the need for a re-verification. One must ask the question, is that why he was abused and thrown out? Yeah. Because he was supportive and insistent on a re-verification? We are going down a dangerous road if we don't have it.
Despotism.
The second issue that arises is the issue of the sanctity of Parliament. Hear, hear. And whether or not parliamentarians, and specifically the opposition, can rely on the word of a minister. Yeah. Not this one. That says, I give my commitment. Do not pursue the matter. Again, we have been there before. Michael Manley, in this house, standing right here, secured a commitment from the then Prime Minister that no elections would be called until a new list was prepared. His word, that commitment was breached, and we know what happened in the 1983 so-called bogus election. It created a national constitutional crisis. Let us not go there again. Protecting our democracy is essential to the empowerment of our people. Because, you know, there is one thing that I believe every Jamaican values, and it is his or her freedom. Right. The belief that the rights that we have will not be taken away. Right. That's right. Mr. Speaker, I cannot be any more earnest. I cannot be any more passionate about the need for us not to go down the road of using the power of finances to stymie the work of the Electoral Commission. The fact that Jamaica is in the grip of massive inequality, which leaves too many Jamaicans behind, is not in doubt. The citizens of one Jamaica are able to afford first-rate, first-world health services wherever they are available, whether here or abroad. In the other Jamaica, the majority are forced to languish in decrepit and run-down conditions and are left to use health facilities offering less than basic standards of health care. One Jamaica has access to up-to-date traditional high schools, giving a reasonable 21st century education, while the other two-thirds of our children are left behind with little hope of overcoming the deficiencies of underperforming educational institutions. Some live in plush surroundings, while a quarter of the population lives in substandard squatter communities and are forced into criminal activities to access electricity, water, and the other basic amenities of life. We simply cannot go on this way. No nation can make progress or achieve prosperity if we leave intact the basic structures in our society that create this inequality. Our mission now, Mr. Speaker, must be to mash down this divide that sustains this inequality and passes it on from generation to generation. We are not saying that these conditions emerged in the last 2 years, and it is true, although the last 2 years have not helped. They have made it worse, in fact. But we are not saying that these conditions emerged in the last 2 years. And it is also true that since the right to vote was achieved in 1944, administrations drawn from both sides have made important contributions to improving the quality of life of the poor people of this country. God knows errors have been made along the way by both sides. We have tried to correct them. I spent much effort and energy, particularly between 2012 and 2016, taking this country from the brink of bankruptcy and disaster. We moved the debt down. We moved the debt down and stabilized the ship of state. I spent a lot of my political capital, mine personally and that of the movement, protecting people like Miss Miri, who daily struggle to survive. But we did what was right for the country to get it out of the plight that it was in. Now that we have secured macroeconomic stability, let us resolve never to go the way of unsustainable buildup of debt again. Take on board the proposal made by the opposition spokesman on finance, institutionalize an epoch to ensure that Jamaica never repeats the errors of the past 40 years. We must now take on frontally the mission to break down the inequalities that still scar our country and which sap the will and morale of the majority of our people. We must now dedicate ourselves to lifting up the performance of our high schools and give real opportunity to the two-thirds of our children that are being left behind by the poor performance in our non-traditional high schools. With opportunity, they will flourish. We commit to a massive land reform program that will unlock the potential of our landless farmers. We commit to the 700,000 Jamaicans languishing without land title in so-called squatter communities to transform their quality of life so they can feel proud about being Jamaican as much as any other Jamaican. They too deserve the chance to pursue a real Jamaican dream. We commit to build a new economy for our small business people using creative techniques to unlock $200 billion of credit dedicated and on call to the small businesses of this country. We commit to give respect to workers and to their rights of negotiation. We reject dictatorship creeping our other eyes. And we will respect and strengthen democracy. We will build on the foundations laid to secure growth with equity for all our people. To our young people in particular, I want to say, don't give up hope. Instead, join us in this struggle to build on the foundations laid by those who have gone before. We know by the examples of the great Bob Marley, Jimmy Cliff, Peter Tosh, Usain Bolt, Don Quarry, Shelley Ann Fraser Price, Veronica Campbell-Brown, Merlene Ottey, and many others, thousands of our athletes, by Elaine Thompson. We know from our scholars like Orlando Patterson, George Beckford, Norman Gervan, Carl Stone, and the contemporary generations that we are a people of talent and skill, and given opportunity, we will rise to the top anywhere on God's earth. Jamaica is a God-blessed country with people tested and nurtured by history. We are a great, great people. Let us take up the challenge of our time and join together to build a better Jamaica that works for all the people. Let us recall the inspiring words of one of our poets, M.G. Smith. I saw my land in the morning, and oh, but she was fair. The hills flamed upwards, scorning death and failure here. I saw my friends in the morning. They called from an equal gate. Build now while time is burning, forward before it's late. As Jimmy Cliff reminds us, another of our poets, you can get it if you really want, even though there are many rivers to cross. God bless the people of Jamaica. Let us give him thanks by building a Jamaica that works for us.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. We are still in session. Minister Warmington.
Mr. Speaker, I ask a suspension of the debate on the appropriation bill until next Tuesday, when the Most Honourable Prime Minister will make his contribution.
The question is that the debate on the bill be suspended Those in favor? Those against? As of it.
Mr. Speaker, it's not intended to do any
Order,
further.
please.
Mr. Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business today. I ask that the House be adjourned until next Tuesday, the 20th, at 2 p.m.
Before I put the adjournment, I congratulate those in the gallery so far, and to advise you, you stay where you are until the mace goes through the door. The question is that the House be now adjourned until Tuesday, March 20th. Those in favor? Mr. Phillips. Mr. Phillips, it just was not brought to my attention. And I'm glad that you do so at this stage. And the motion on the floor is for the adjournment. Those in favor? Those against? As of it. This Honorable House now stands adjourned until Tuesday, March 20th at 2 p.m.